Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Network, brought to you by the GSMC Sport. Welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Excuse me, rough start to the show today, but I'm your host TJ Mabardi, and we are coming to you live on a Tuesday afternoon. We are in the middle of summer here, so obviously the sports headlines aren't necessarily flying off the table, which is typically around when ESPN starts to put out their polls to coaches, executives, and scouts to rank the top 10 players at any given position. They did so for running backs, so I wanted to just look at the list that they put together. I thought it was pretty interesting, and I have some thoughts on that. So we'll be breaking that down, and then we're going to move on to some topics around the NBA. LeBron James reworked his contract that was initially agreed upon between him and the Lakers, and he's taking about $3 million less to help the Lakers get under the second luxury tax apron, so we'll be breaking that down. Additionally, I want to look at some of the massive contracts that have been handed out to members of the 2021 NBA draft, headlined by Cade Cunningham, who, just within the past 30 minutes got his new contract extension. So we'll be talking about that, a little bit of Summer League first thoughts, and additionally we'll be looking at some college basketball prospects for next season as the NBA draft is now in the books. We're seeing this new wave of players come in, and we're already looking ahead to next year where the 2025 NBA draft is supposed to be stacked. So we are going to dive into all of that. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can leave a tip or donation at the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. You can leave a comment that will pop up on screen for everybody to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. But now that we are early July, we are ramping up into football season, and with that being said, we're going to be ramping up the content here on the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we're going to start off the show today by diving into the list that ESPN put out. They polled NFL executives, head coaches, and scouts for them to rank the top 10 running backs in the league entering next season. So we're just going to be sharing some thoughts on that and going through, rank by rank. Number 1 was Christian McCaffrey. Now, this is probably very little surprise here. McCaffrey was number 2 last year, and probably not number 1 just because of the idea that there is some sense of injury concern with him, which, you can make the argument that would still somewhat be a little bit of a concern now. But last year, played in 16 out of 17 games, led the league in rush yards and scrimmage yards. He was unbelievable, and he has been for, the entirety of his 8-year career up to this point, and just somebody who can absolutely do it all. You look at some of the contracts that have been handed out to running backs over the past decade or so, some players that have gotten injured, Todd Gurley, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, some of these other players that have received these big-time paydays and have sort of been a cautionary tale as to why you don't give out these massive contracts to running backs. And again, Christian McCaffrey has absolutely dealt with his fair share of injuries, but we're looking at 2 straight years where he's played in at least 16 games, and you have to just feel great about the overall talent that he is. He's basically, I think at least, the engine that kind of makes, Kyle Shanahan, obviously the head coach and play caller, is who is able to, draw up all the plays, but the positional flexibility of Christian McCaffrey does make things just that much more impactful for the 49ers, and I think, no doubt in my mind, that he is the number 1 running back in the league headed into next year. Number 2 was a little bit of a surprise to me. Breece Hall, of course, of the New York Jets, played 2 seasons in the NFL so far and missed the majority of one of them with a torn ACL injury in his rookie season. And to see him this up high in this list probably does speak, at least to some degree, not as any disrespect towards Breece Hall, but kind of where executives feel about the running back position, that you're getting somebody who, yes, just suffered a torn ACL a couple years ago, but is also, a running back that doesn't have that much tread on his tires just yet. And also, for whatever it's worth, the fact that, Breece Hall was able to return from a torn ACL injury, tore it in October of 2022, and he made it back for week 1 last year for the Jets and ended up having over 100 yards in that game as well. It goes to show how far we've come with sports medicine as well. Just wanted to highlight that because, a torn ACL in the NFL used to be a death sentence, especially for a running back. And the fact that he is now sort of back to this version of himself already is really encouraging there. But Hall, again, even still, I really like the player. I was surprised to see him this far up on the list. Now, I'm sure some of it is projections, and moving forward, Hall should be one of the top running backs in the league for some time. But last year, he didn't even hit 1,000 yards on the ground. Now, that being said, we all know what the situations are currently surrounding that Jets offense, that, as soon as Aaron Rodgers went down last season on the first drive of the game, no teams were afraid of the Jets passing game. So, Breece Hall was dealing with loaded boxes the entire season and was still, just under that 1,000-yard mark. He did have a career high in receiving yards from, college on, 591 receiving yards. Pretty significant there. Now, the Jets were obviously checking down a lot, but it does sort of go to show as well that if the Jets do have a legitimate passing game moving forward, he's going to benefit from it a lot because he's going to have more room directly in front of him to take off on the ground. And now, it's not like his profile necessarily coming into the NFL was ever that he was going to, that he's at least shown that he is this, dual threat running back of rushing and receiving. But last year, I thought that he very well demonstrated that. And again, weird circumstances surrounding him, but he's only going to continue to get better. And again, it was a surprise to me seeing him this high, but you also have to give your respect to him because he is one of the up-and-coming players in the NFL. Number 3 is Nick Chubb, and this is obviously one of the most strange players to try and put into a position here just because of the injury factor. Nick Chubb was number 1 in this poll a year ago today, and it was very well justified. Nick Chubb is the best pure rusher, I would argue, in the league. Plus, he's no slouch either in the receiving game. But, when you look at that injury that he suffered in week 2 against the Steelers, tearing his ACL and MCL, had the additional damage to his meniscus and medial capsule all in one hit. It was a brutal, brutal injury. And it's not the first time we've seen Nick Chubb suffer these types of injuries as well. It was the same knee that he had seriously injured when he was in college at Georgia in 2015. It required 2 surgeries in the fall to be able to fully repair that left knee of his. So, fingers crossed that he's going to be able to come back because, again, he is just an absolute monster of a running back, and he is a huge difference maker as well for the Browns. Now, they just made the playoffs last year even without him, but Nick Chubb behind that talented offensive line is a scary force there. And, who knows what sort of comes of Deshaun Watson, where he is at with the Browns franchise at this point. But, they're hoping that he can take a step forward, and having Nick Chubb available to him and a dominant run game would be a massive part of that. Because as much as the Browns defense is still very talented, you're asking a lot of that defense to replicate the type of season that they had that was, borderline historic last season for the Browns, obviously up until that playoff game. Number 4, Saquon Barkley, of course signed by the Philadelphia Eagles in free agency this past year. he's somebody that has definitely had a more illustrious, you could say, profile up to this point in his career versus a Breece Hall. But there are some injury concerns with Saquon as well, like we just talked about. That's kind of something you can throw into the conversation with just about every running back on this list. But Saquon is a do-it-all guy that's going to add a much improved dynamic out of the backfield. DeAndre Swift was no slouch necessarily last year, but he also did very much benefit from having, one of, if not the best offensive line in the NFL. And Saquon is going to, now obviously without Jason Kelce on that front, but Barkley is going to be an awesome fit. I'm super excited to see what Kellen Moore is able to cook up with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, who Hurts is going to be healthier this year. You would have to hope. He was dealing with some injuries that limited his mobility last year. Him and Barkley as a read option threat is something that is going to strike a lot of fear in defenses next year. So this is about the range I would put Barkley in as well. Number 5 was Jonathan Taylor. Taylor, has had a very loud career up to this point, despite it being so short, where, there was absolutely an argument for him to be higher. I think last year when this list came out, coming off of a down year, he was number 6. And the Colts are in a little bit of a weird spot. A good, not great offensive line obviously had different things going on with that quarterback room. Anthony Richardson going down early in the year. Gardner Minshew taking over and being a good option for them. But again, I just talked about the read option threat of Hurts and Barkley. We'll see if the Colts decide to lean into that type of offense or if they're going to just try and keep Anthony Richardson as clean as possible. But, two, physical specimens, absolutely, that are very versatile, and I'm really looking forward to that combination of the two of them as well. Number 6, Bijan Robinson. And Bijan is somebody who, his stats don't necessarily pop off the screen necessarily from his rookie season, but obviously it was a conversation all year long, the way that he was used, and having Arthur Smith sort of, defending his strategies in terms of how to use Bijan. He is going to continue to get better. You could see in a vacuum, the type of dynamic movements and the cuts that he has, they just stand out on another level. He is an up-and-coming player. I still don't know if I were the Falcons that I would have taken him in the first round last year. I kind of wish Bijan was himself in a better position, but Falcons fans, you should be looking forward to this being a franchise player. I think somebody who is going to exceed his rookie contract, and, we'll see what the price point looks like in a couple years from now, but somebody that's probably going to be in Atlanta for a while, or at least playing in the NFL for a long time. Number 7 was Josh Jacobs. And honestly, I think that ultimately when you look at the very heavy workload he had in the 2022-23 season, the fact that he led the NFL in touches that year, the fact that we saw him physically hold up is a great sign. Jacobs, it feels like he's been in the NFL forever, but he's still just 25 years old. And again, the fact that he has shown the capability of being this absolute workhorse of a running back, and then he's moving into this new system with the Green Bay Packers where they're looking to push their chips in a little bit more. I know that the statistics weren't necessarily the same in 2023 as they were in 22, but Jacobs was in a very lackluster offense last year with the Raiders, and I think that now that he's with the Packers, we're going to see him put up big numbers once again. I do think that he is an upgrade over Aaron Jones, even though Aaron Jones, who, just spoiler alert here, did not make the top 10. He was on the honorable mentions, and I like Aaron Jones a lot. I think he absolutely had a case to, slide into, we'll get there when we get there, but I probably would have had him number 10 about that placing. But Josh Jacobs is an excellent player, and it's important to not forget about him after a little bit of a quieter season last year. Number 8 was Jahmyr Gibbs of course, the rookie sensation out of the first round selection for the Lions last year. And again, this is another player, when you look at what a modern running back looks like in terms of being able to get it done on the ground and in the passing game, Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of the embodiment of what the Lions and, where the league as a whole is sort of looking to go with the direction of their running backs. And, Gibbs has a very bright future. Last year, they used him a lot in tandem with David Montgomery. I'm going to be curious to see whether or not they prefer to lean into, evening up the workload so they don't risk, putting too much pressure on Gibbs or whatnot. But when they drafted him, there were stories coming out of Detroit that they were interested in seeing what he could look like if he lined up on the outside as a wide receiver. And that's something that we didn't really see all too much of. Now, again, was a great receiving threat last year, but curious to see what his evolution looks like in the NFL, because I think he is capable of a lot. So 8 is almost even a little bit low to me, but let me know how you feel in the comments section. Number 9 was Derrick Henry. And this is another one where it's just very strange to sort of, see him this low on a running back list, considering he has been, I think the easiest selection of a future Hall of Fame running back over the last decade or so, where, he has had more than 2,000 carries over the last 8 years. And typically we see the way that sort of drags down a running back's career, having that high of a workload. And of course, there was that one season for Derrick Henry a couple years ago where he was dealing with the foot injury, I believe, as I double check here. That was in 2020.